The silence of Kageboshi was a physical weight. It pressed on the ears, a heavy velvet blanket woven from fog, cedar, and the dust of ages. Kenji Tanaka felt it settle back over him the moment he killed the engine of his car. 20 years. 20 years since he had fled this valley, and the silence was just as he remembered it. Absolute, watchful, and deeply wrong. Kenji, formerly Detective Tanaka of the Tokyo Metropolitan Police Department's elite Special Investigations Unit, was a man built from hard lines and sharper instincts. His world was one of tangible evidence. Fiber analysis, blood spatter geometry, the subtle tells of a liar's pulse. He had left Kageboshi to trade its suffocating myths for the cold logic of the city. But the village had never truly left him. It was a splinter of ice in his soul, a cold spot that ached with the memory of his childhood friend, Akari, and the official report that had called her death an accident. He'd never believed it. That belief had cost him his career. His obsessive, unauthorized reinvestigation had painted him as unstable, a man chasing ghosts. Now, it seemed, the ghosts were chasing him back. The inciting incident had arrived 3 days ago as a single, encrypted email from his younger brother, Yuki. Yuki, the reckless photojournalist, the one who had inherited their family's idealism instead of Kenji's hardened cynicism. He had become obsessed with the very story Kenji had run from. The slow, strange death of Kageboshi, the village of the Shadow Star, and the quiet disappearance of its children over the decades. The password to the file was simple: *Akari*. His fingers had trembled as he typed it. A single image, loaded, stark, and horrifying. It was the central workshop, a place forbidden to all but the guild masters. The cavernous room was filled with dolls, life-sized, exquisitely crafted, and wearing the faces of the lost. He saw boys and girls he'd known, their youthful features perfectly rendered, in painted porcelain. And there, in the center, on a pedestal of honor, was a doll with Akari's face, her expression one of placid, unending sorrow. The file's name was a single desperate word: *Help*. Now, stepping out into the damp air, Kenji felt 1,000 pairs of eyes on him. The village was a museum of itself. In every window, on every porch, sat the famous Kageboshi dolls. Kimono-clad maidens, stoic samurai boys, playful children frozen in moments of joy. They outnumbered the living residents 10 to 1, their glass eyes gleaming in the perpetual twilight of the valley. The only sounds were the drip of condensation from the eaves of the curved roofs and the rustle of unseen things in the dense, towering forest that ringed the valley like prison walls. He drew his coat tighter, his hand instinctively resting on the cold steel of the Sig Sauer P-226 holstered beneath it. This wasn't a police investigation. This was an exorcism. His first stop was the Times Koban *, the small police box near the village entrance. The man inside looked as if he'd been stitched together from spare parts of anxiety. Constable Sato was thin and perpetually stooped, his uniform hanging loosely on his frame. He jumped when Kenji entered, spilling a cup of green tea. "Tanaka-san," Sato stammered, bowing repeatedly. I wasn't expecting you. We heard your brother was visiting." "He's missing, Sato-san," Kenji said, his voice flat, cutting through the man's fluster. "I'm here to find him." Sato's eyes darted towards the windows, towards the silent audience of dolls. Missing is a strong word. People, they come and go. Yuki-san was very inquisitive. Perhaps he wandered into the forests. Yuki is a professional. He doesn't just wander, Kenji countered, his gaze unwavering. He was profiling the man already. Deceptive nervousness. Avoidant eye contact. The fear was real, but it wasn't of Kenji. It was of something else. Sato wrung his hands. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Listen, Tanaka-san. Things are not right here. They haven't been for a long time. You know that. Lady Chiyo, she runs this village, not the law. She speaks of tradition, of the sacred art, but children vanish. People who ask too many questions, they leave. Kenji felt a flicker of something not trust, but potential utility. What do you know? Yuki-san was asking about the workshop. The one beneath the main shrine. Sato whispered, sweat beading on his brow. It is forbidden, asterisk, hallowed asterisk, she calls it. He thought the disappearances were connected to the dolls. He was right. Sato slipped a folded, hand-drawn map across the counter. This shows the old paths, the ones the villagers don't use. It leads to the back of the shrine. I can't be seen helping you. She has eyes everywhere. He glanced pointedly at a doll of a little girl sitting on a shelf behind him. Everywhere. Kenji took the map. It felt too easy, a perfect piece of bait. But it was the only lead he had. Why help me? Because I have a daughter, Sato said, his voice cracking. And I don't want her to become art. The lie was beautifully constructed, rooted in a believable fear. Kenji's instinct screamed that it was a performance, but he had to play the part. He needed access. Arigato, Sato-san. I won't forget this. His next visit was to the source of the village's power, Lady Chiyo. Her home was the largest in Kageboshi, a sprawling traditional estate at the foot of the shrine hill. She received him in a tatami room that smelled of old wood and incense. She was ancient, a woman who seemed carved from petrified timber, her face a web of fine wrinkles, but her eyes were chips of black obsidian, sharp and intelligent. Kenji-kun, she said, her voice a dry rustle of leaves. The prodigal son returns, but your face is full of storms. You carry the city's poisons with you. My brother, Yuki, is missing, Kenji said, forgoing the pleasantries. Ah, the young photographer. She nodded slowly, pouring him tea with a steady hand. He had a fire in his spirit. He wanted to understand our soul. Kageboshi's soul is in its art. In our Ningyo, we give a piece of ourselves to each creation, so they might live forever. It is a great honor. The words were laden with a hidden meaning that made Kenji's skin crawl. Where is he, Chiyo-sama? The young are often reckless. They do not respect the old ways, the boundaries, she said, her gaze distant. The forest is deep. The spirits are restless. He was warned not to pry into the heart of our craft. Her eyes met his, and for a second, the gentle matriarch vanished, replaced by a chilling authority, a priestess guarding a terrible secret. You were wise to leave, Kenji-kun. You should have stayed away. Leaving her estate, the feeling of being watched intensified. The dolls seemed to have shifted. A head here, tilted at a new angle. A fan there, now closed. It was impossible, a trick of the light and his frayed nerves, but the impression was overwhelming. He was a rat in a maze, and the walls had eyes. Using Sato's map, he bypassed the main village path, taking a treacherous, moss-covered trail that wound through the dark woods behind the shrine. The air grew colder. He began to hear things, the faint, phantom sound of a child's giggle, seeming to come from just behind him. He'd whirl around, gun half drawn, to find nothing but dripping trees and shadow. The hallucinations were a classic psychological warfare tactic. Isolate the target, break down their perception of reality. The back of the shrine was a sheer rock face, but a small, heavily weathered wooden door was set into it, almost invisible against the stone. It was barred from the outside with a simple wooden plank. A setup they wanted him to get in. He slid the bar away and pushed the door open. A wave of cool, musty air washed over him, carrying the scent of clay, varnish, and something else. Something metallic and vaguely organic. He drew his weapon, a compact flashlight held beneath it in a classic Weaver grip, and descended the stone steps into the darkness. The beam of his flashlight cut through the gloom, revealing the scene from Yuki's photograph. He was in the Forbidden Workshop. It was a cavernous space, a small portion of a much larger natural cave system. Hundreds of dolls stood in silent ranks on tiered shelves that rose into the darkness. Their glass eyes, thousands of them, caught the light, scattering it into a million tiny predatory glints. In the center of the room was a large stone platform, stained dark. He moved cautiously, his footsteps echoing in the vast chamber. The faces, he recognized them all. The children who had vanished over his lifetime. He found Akari's doll, her kimono unblemished, her face a perfect, heartbreaking replica. He reached out a hand, his fingers brushing the cold porcelain of her cheek. A sound behind him, a soft scraping noise. He spun around, light and weapon tracking together. A doll of a small boy, one he hadn't noticed before, was now standing in the middle of the floor, a good 10 feet from the shelf it must have occupied. It hadn't been there a second ago. His heart hammered against his ribs. He was a man of logic, of fact. Dolls did not move on their own. Then he heard it again, clearer this time. A child's sob, echoing from the deeper darkness of the caves beyond the workshop. "Yuki! Yuki!" he shouted, his voice swallowed by the oppressive silence. The sobbing answered him, a clear lure. It was a trap, he knew it, but it was his brother. He had no choice. He plunged deeper into the cave, leaving the silent army of dolls behind. The passage twisted and turned, the air growing thick with humidity and the smell of decay. He found a smaller chamber, lit by a single bare bulb hanging from a wire. On the floor was Yuki's camera bag, open, its contents strewn about. And next to it, a small, leather-bound journal. Kenji snatched it up. Yuki's frantic script filled the pages. He'd discovered the truth. The pact. Lady Chiyo wasn't just preserving an art. She was feeding a curse. The village's original doll maker, a woman named O-Rin, had been a master artisan centuries ago. Betrayed by jealous rivals, she had been murdered. Her masterpiece, a doll of her own daughter, stolen. Her vengeful spirit, the Onryo they called the Ningyo Tsukai, the doll master, had returned. It had promised the village prosperity and fame, but only if it was given vessels. Children. Their souls were bound to the dolls, granting the spirit a legion of eyes and limbs, and anchoring it to the mortal world. The final entry was chilling. Asterisk, Sato is one of them. He's her enforcer. He's been leading me. I think they want me to be the next masterpiece. Kenji, if you're reading this, don't trust him. Destroy the anchor. She called it the bride. Asterisk, a sharp times click times echoed from the passage behind him. Kenji dove, rolling behind a rock formation as the roar of a gunshot deafened him in the enclosed space. A chip of stone exploded from where his head had been. You were always too smart for your own good, Tanaka-san. Constable Sato's voice, now stripped of all its feigned fear, boomed in the chamber. He stood at the entrance, no longer stooped, but tall and resolute, his service revolver held steady. Lady Chiyo knew you wouldn't be able to resist playing the detective. We just had to give you the clues to follow. Where is my brother, Sato? Kenji growled, keeping his body behind the rock. He is being prepared. An honor. Tonight is the Festival of Hanging Lanterns, a most auspicious night for a soul to be transferred, Sato said calmly. The Ningyo Tsukai has grown weary of the small ones. It desires a stronger vessel. Two, in fact. Brothers, bound by blood. The sons who fled Kageboshi, your return is the ultimate offering. It will secure our village for another generation. The psychological games, the sounds, the moving doll, it was all designed to wear him down, to fill him with terror and doubt before the final confrontation. To make him a more potent sacrifice. You're insane. You're feeding your children to a ghost. We are ensuring our survival, Sato roared, his fanaticism blazing. You, who abandoned us for the filth of the city, you could never understand. Now, come out. The master is waiting. Kenji knew he had one chance. He took a deep breath, listening. He could hear the faint festival music from the village above, a grotesque counterpoint to the tense silence. And he could hear something else. The faintest whisper, a woman's voice full of ancient sorrow, seeming to come from the very rock around him. Asterisk. My child. Where is my child? Asterisk. He needed a distraction. In Yuki's bag, he'd seen a spare flash for the camera. His fingers found it. Counting to 3, he tossed it out into the center of the chamber. As it clattered on the stone, Sato fired instinctively. In that split second of muzzle flash and thunder, Kenji burst from behind the rock, charging forward. Sato was fast, but Kenji was a practitioner of Krav Maga, a system designed for brutal efficiency. He didn't aim for the gun. He aimed for the man. He slammed into Sato's side, driving him into the cave wall. The constable's head connected with the stone with a sickening crack. The gun flew from his hand, skittering into the darkness. Sato slumped, but he wasn't out. He lunged, a ritual knife appearing in his hand. The blade arced towards Kenji's throat. Kenji blocked the steel, ringing against the slide of his pistol. He twisted, using Sato's momentum against him, and drove his elbow into the man's temple. Sato crumpled to the ground, unconscious. Kenji didn't waste a second. He knew where he had to go. Back to the workshop. Back to where they were holding Yuki. He emerged from the passage into a nightmare transformed. The workshop was no longer still. It was illuminated by the eerie, swinging glow of dozens of paper lanterns that had been hung from the ceiling, their light casting long, dancing shadows. In the center, on the stone platform, Yuki was bound, his eyes wide with terror. Lady Chiyo stood before him, chanting in a low, ancient dialect, holding a porcelain doll with a blank, unpainted face, and all around them, the army of dolls was moving. They weren't walking. They moved with a silent, joint-snapping grace that was utterly inhuman. Heads turned in perfect synchrony, their glass eyes locking onto him. Hundreds of them began to advance, their small feet skittering across the stone floor with a dry, insect-like sound. They flowed around the shelves like a tide of porcelain and silk, a silent, implacable army. Kenji opened fire. The first shot took a doll in the center of its chest, shattering its porcelain torso. It stumbled and fell, but 2 more immediately took its place. He fired again and again, the roar of the P-226, a blasphemy in the sacred silence. He was a trained marksman, but his targets were small, fast, and unnervingly childlike. Firing on them felt like a monstrous act, and the Onryo knew it. He could feel its malevolent satisfaction, its icy touch on his mind, whispering images of Akari's dead body into his thoughts. He ejected the empty magazine, slamming a fresh one home as the first wave reached him. A doll of a samurai boy lunged, a tiny ornamental katana in its hands. He kicked it away, its body shattering against a workbench. Another latched onto his leg, its porcelain fingers surprisingly strong. He stomped down, crushing its head under his heel. It was a battle he could not win. For every one he destroyed, 3 more surged forward. They swarmed him, their weight dragging him down. He fought, swinging his pistol as a club, but he was being overwhelmed. Through the sea of tiny bodies, he could see Lady Chiyo raise the blank-faced doll over Yuki. The ritual was reaching its climax. Asterisk, destroy the anchor. The bride. Asterisk Yuki's words screamed in his mind. He scanned the workshop frantically. Where was it? He saw a heavy curtain of faded crimson silk hanging against the back wall, behind the main altar. A place of honor. With a desperate roar, he shoved the dolls away from him, creating a precious second of space. He fired 2 rounds into the chain, holding a massive shelf of doll parts, sending it crashing down, creating a temporary barrier. He scrambled over the pile of shattered limbs and torsos and tore the curtain aside. Behind it was a small, hidden alcove, a shrine, and inside, sitting on a silk cushion, was the masterpiece, a life-sized effigy of a bride in a pure white kimono. Her face was a work of divine artistry, beautiful and serene. But as his eyes met hers, the painted smile curdled, the serene expression twisting into a silent, contorted mask of pure, undiluted rage. The air in the room plunged to freezing. The pressure in his skull became unbearable. He was looking at the heart of the curse. "You will not defile this holy place!" Lady Chiyo shrieked, her matriarchal composure finally shattering. She abandoned Yuki, rushing towards Kenji with a speed that defied her age. Kenji looked from her fanatical face to the enraged doll, then to the hanging paper lanterns. Each held a lit candle. He didn't need to fight an army of puppets or an ancient priestess. He needed to fight the curse itself. And curses feared one thing above all else: purification. He grabbed one of the lanterns, ignoring the searing heat, and hurled it at the base of the shrine. The dry silk cushion and ancient wooden latticework caught fire instantly. "No!" Lady Chiyo screamed, a sound of inhuman despair. The bride doll's face twisted, further, its mouth opening in a silent, agonized shriek that Kenji felt in his very bones. A wave of psychic force threw him back, but it was too late. The fire was spreading, catching on the varnish-soaked workbenches, the piles of raw cotton, the dry wooden shelves. Lady Chiyo scrambled to beat out the flames with her bare hands, but the inferno was growing too quickly. The effect on the dolls was immediate and absolute. They froze mid-stride, their limbs locking into place. The unnerving animation vanished, leaving them as nothing more than painted statues once more. The invisible presence in Kenji's mind, the crushing weight of the Onryo's sorrow and rage, evaporated like mist in the Sunday he had severed the connection. He scrambled to the altar and cut Yuki's bonds with his combat knife. His brother was weak, disoriented, but alive. "Come on!" Kenji yelled, pulling him to his feet. The workshop was turning into a furnace. The ceiling groaned, and burning beams began to fall. Lady Chiyo was on her knees before the burning shrine, sobbing, a high priestess watching her god die. "Kenji, look!" Yuki gasped, pointing. As the flames consumed the bride doll, its beautiful face blackened and cracked. From the melting glass eyes, 2 thick black tears rolled down its porcelain cheeks and sizzled into steam. The ancient curse was breaking. Kenji half-dragged, half-carried his brother through the chaos. They dodged falling shelves and walls of flame. The frozen dolls were now fuel for the fire, their silk kimonos igniting, their painted faces melting in the extreme heat. The workshop that had been a place of silent, creeping horror was now a roaring, cleansing hell. They burst out of the cave entrance and into the night. They didn't stop, scrambling up the path to the village square. Below them, smoke and embers were beginning to pour from the concealed entrance behind the shrine. The festival had stopped. Villagers, including a now conscious and horrified Sato, were staring up at the shrine hill as the first tongues of flame began to lick up the ancient wood of the main building itself. Kenji and Yuki collapsed at the edge of the forest, gasping in the cool night air. The village was no longer illuminated by the gentle glow of paper lanterns, but by the hungry, roaring light of the inferno they had started. The fire was spreading, a great, golden serpent consuming the dark heart of Kageboshi. The oppressive silence was finally, irrevocably broken. In its place was the roar and crackle of purification. The souls of the lost children were free. The long, silent reign of the dolls was over. Kenji looked at the burning village, the source of all his trauma, and for the first time in 20 years, he felt the splinter of ice in his soul begin to melt.